Okay, so for Wednesday, we will be in chapter 20, starting in verse 20 through 21, verse 4. So I'll be teaching Wednesday, but as long as we get through everything today, 20 through 21, verse 4. Okay, so we're hitting another turning point today in our text. Eric Stenson will love this analogy, but if you think like the Fellowship of the Ring, where everything seems all happy in the beginning when they're in the Shire, and then things sort of progress and it gets darker and darker as you go through the story. Well, we've kind of gotten to the Black Gate. We're there, and things are going to be very different from here forward. Let's start by reading in chapter 19, verses 28 through 40. And when he had said these things, he went ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent 2 disciples, saying, "Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever yet sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this, 'The Lord has need of it.'" So those who were sent went away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, its owner said to them, "Why are you untying the colt?" And they said, "The Lord has need of it." And they brought it to Jesus. And throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near, already the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." He answered, "I tell you, if these were silent, the very stones would cry out." So, we've got this picture of him starting to approach the city. And it reminds us of some things in the Old Testament. Maybe you have some thoughts on your mind. I thought about in 2 Kings 9, when they anoint King Jehu and they put all the cloaks beneath the step where he was going to sit. I think about Zechariah 9:9. "Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." I think about David anointing Solomon and having him ride on his mule into the city. These are sort of the pictures, that we get. But what is awry? As this king comes in to the city, what doesn't look the way that you would expect? It's not a trick question.
If Caesar was coming to town, it wouldn't be on a donkey.
That's right. He might be on like a royal steed. What else might he have with him?
A parade.
A parade, a military.
He wouldn't be standing alone.
Wouldn't be
facing
standing alone.
These people.
Yeah, and I want to a lot of times we think of this picture as Jesus riding into the temple, but we actually are not there yet. We're before we get to Jerusalem. So we're at these little small towns on their way into Jerusalem. And one thing we need to keep in mind about where we're at is that as the Passover festival is coming on, massive crowds are pouring to the city. So we've got a population in Jerusalem that's probably about 6 times what it normally is at this moment. And so as he starts to come in, a lot of these people, a lot of these pilgrims that are coming from Jericho and other places, they are the ones that are saying, Blessed is this king of ours, quoting from Psalm 118 and other places. It seems like this great picture for us as we look at it today. But I think it might be a little more suspect if we think about what's going to happen in the days ahead. Think about these people. Are they recognizing Jesus as the Savior of their sins? As he's coming into the city, is that what their focus is? This goes back to every class I've taught in Luke where we talk about this. It's been consistent pretty much from day one. When Mary gets the message, your son is going to reign on David's throne. There is a picture that comes to her mind that I don't think looks like what's getting ready to transpire. And we get little hints all along the story. Like when, I think it was Simeon said to Mary, you're going to be pierced with a sword. And everything up to that point sounded like, my son's going to be king in Israel. He's going to rule forever in Israel. I bore the Son of God, and he's going to rule. And he's going to rule David's throne. And she has a very specific picture of what ruling on David's throne looks like. And yet, Simeon says, you're going to be pierced by a sword. And I bet she's thinking, ooh, what? Now, what was that part? They're not recognizing him as the Savior of their sin. They're welcoming him out of a desire for a messianic deliverer. And the way that they see the messianic deliverer is pretty simple. Get Rome out of our lives. We want to be sovereign. We don't want to deal with these folks anymore. And so I would ask you, we have to sort of reconcile these overwhelming crowds that are supportive of him with what's going to happen in just a few days. Who's going to be by his side by the time he's on that cross?
Very few.
Right? Where's these crowds? Where are all the people that were dropping their cloaks on the ground? When he's on the cross just a few days later, where did those people go? Why did they abandon him?
They thought he was guilty.
Okay? Some of them thought he was guilty.
Looked like a failure.
Looked like a failed project, didn't it? These people were honoring him because they had seen amazing works. But in the end, what they really were valuing was just the idea of what he could do for them temporarily. In their physical place where they lived. How can you make my life different? No different than us when we go to the voting booth and say, I'm going to vote for this guy or this girl or whatever. It's the same kind of thing. They were looking at it as he's going to get us into a better situation in our circumstances that we live here. They were not thinking of him as the king who comes to save them from their sin. Okay, let me just say one more thing. So these hosannas, they're recognizing him as the one from David. It is the point. I do think that what Brett said is the point. When he failed to meet their expectations. When he didn't come in and do it the way that they thought. They either just sort of, I'm thinking of that Homer Simpson back into the bushes thing. I don't know if you guys ever see that. They just kind of back away from it. Or they say, hey, like, this wasn't what I had in mind. He must not be who we thought he was, because look, he's not taking over. Let's keep reading. Well, actually, so here's this. I forgot about this map. So as I was talking about coming into the city. So we started up in Capernaum. This is chapter 9 where he turns his face towards Jerusalem, as done here. And then here, you see these little towns that are before Jerusalem, where he's headed in. And on this next set of verses, he's going to get into Jerusalem. 1941 through 48. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, and saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes, for the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, it is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words. So in the temple, he's not in the temple proper. He's in the outer court here. This big surrounding. I read one place that's about 30 acres. That's a big area. So the court of the Gentiles is where everyone hung out. That's where the marketplace would be. That's where Jesus was spending his time, and there were massive crowds there due to the Passover festival. As he comes in, what is he weeping about?
They missed it. They didn't see it. They didn't recognize him for who he really was.
Yeah, so if we back up in Luke, this is the first point where I remember that we start to see this bemoaning of Jerusalem and its kind of ultimate fate, right? So he comes in, from very early in Luke, he's teaching, he's doing miracles, he's ridding people of demon possession, he's doing all these powerful things, and then he changes his tone to, hey, they're going to kill me, just so you know. But here we have another tone change. Because on his way into Jerusalem, what he says there in verse 41, it says he wept over the city. Would that you, even you, had known on the day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. Context matters. Let's go back to chapter 9 real quick. (9) and verse 23, just before he sets his eyes towards Jerusalem. And he said to all, if anyone will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God. Now back in 1943, I already read this twice. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground. you and your children with you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you. 21, Josh is going to be teaching this, starting in verse 20. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you know its desolation has come near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are inside the city depart, and let not those who are out in the country enter it, for these are days of vengeance, to fulfill all that has been written. Alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, for there will be great distress upon the earth and wrath against this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword, will be led captive among all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And then in 21:32, just kind of summarizing this, he says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass until all has taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. He starts saying, you're going to see this in your lifetime in chapter 9. And he gets when we get to 21, he's saying, hey, he doesn't just say, like in Matthew it says, when you see the abomination of desolation, we all have to wonder, well, what is the abomination of desolation? What is that? What does that mean? But in Luke, he says it very plainly. When you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, is he just telling a story? Compare this to, are there other places in the Bible where it talks about judgment like this? Backwards. Yes, I know you guys know that the answer is yes, but no one remembers anywhere where there was any judgment like this?
Well, in Revelation.
Okay, let's go back though. That's fine. Revelation is true, and that would probably relate to a lot of these, but what about going backwards?
Jericho, they encircled the city.
Okay. Jericho, thank you. What else? Destruction of Jerusalem, and well, there's a couple times, but in Ezekiel. And here's what's interesting. If you go back to Ezekiel, there's a lot of allegory. I wrote some of them down. There's a lot of symbolism. You get things like the vine that brought forth sour grapes, talking about Jerusalem. You get a pot set on the fire. You get the sword shall devour. Talking to exiles in Babylon saying, hey, you're going to be destroyed and there's going to be a remnant of hope down the road. But when he's in Luke, he spells it out very plainly. There is no symbolism here. When you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, what does he follow that with? Flee. So, I'm not going to steal all Josh's thunder. I don't know where he's going with it in 21. But I want to just say, as we sort of try to encapsulate what is going on in this several chapters right here, I want to make sure that it's clear that Jesus is giving instructions. This is not like in Babylon, where there is this judgment coming, and you don't know when it is. I want you to know that down the road, I'm going to give you some hope. No, he says specifically, you're going to see this take place in your lifetime. And let me tell you something. When you see the army surrounding Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. Don't look back. These are instructions. And I won't bore you with it, but if you're interested, Josephus actually records that when the armies surrounded Jerusalem, that for some strange reason the armies fell back and that many people fled to the mountains. There were people in this passage that listened to the words that Jesus said. And what do you think that the Pharisees and other people did when the army surrounded Jerusalem? Where was the place that they went? Temple. What happened to the temple, Jay?
Destroyed. Was, can't think of the word, but they brought in sacrifice shouldn't have been there. People were there that shouldn't have been there. I can't think of the word I need.
Yeah, they destroyed. If you took Jesus' words and you said, oh, that guy's just crazy, and when the army surrounded Jerusalem, you thought, I got to go where it's safe. God's temple's where I'm going. God will protect me. There was no protection there. You were burned alive. They did not leave one stone upon another. Okay.
Do you think, Brad, that verse 40 plays into this, factors into what Jesus is saying here?
The very stones crying out? Well, what do you mean?
Well, there's the opposition who doesn't like him physically, but there's a lesson there spiritually too. We deny him physically, deny him spiritually, even the creation is going to cry out, "This is your Lord and King."
Yeah.
Let everything deny him, but the creation knows.
Brad, you asked
Yeah.
the question, why did Jesus weep? And, I think it's probably obvious what the answer is, but I mean, these are his people. I mean, think about your own children. I mean, Jerusalem was the social center, the economic center, the religious center for over 1,000 years. This is the place that should have known him. And, in Matthew 23, he says it differently. He says, I wanted to gather you in so many times, but you wouldn't have it. He's sad because he knows he's going to come back. He's going to come back in about 40 years, he's going to completely destroy the city. Everybody in it's going to die. And he's sad because those are his people, and they've rejected him.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay, so I want to talk about something here. I think Jesus, as we think about the progression of him going from into Jerusalem and leading up to, see, I put the cord in. It's plugged in. I gotta somebody's got to make the settings here. Okay. Okay. Goes into Jerusalem, and I would say that he sort of prods this, getting this show on the road. Okay? So, let's talk about it for a second. When we look at cleansing the temple, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words. So as we think about him coming into the temple and starting to kick people out of these courtyards, who is in charge of the temple?
The very people who desecrated it.
Right. So, and we're going to see this. So look in it says right here that the chief priests and scribes and the principal men of the people were seeking to destroy him. If you go back to chapter 9, Jesus says in verse 21, he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised." When they come to arrest him and ultimately send him to be put to death, who's there? The scribes, the elders, and the chief priests. This is the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin is made up, I think there's other people too, but it's the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders make up the Sanhedrin. So when Jesus comes in and says, "Get out of my house," this is going to lead into our next section where they start to talk about authority. Okay. Let's read Luke 20, 1 through 19. One day, as Jesus was teaching the people in the temple and preaching the gospel, the chief priests and the scribes with the elders came up and said to him, "Tell us by what authority you do these things. Or who is it that gave you this authority?" He answered them, "I also will ask you a question. Now tell me, was the baptism of John from heaven or from man?" And they discussed it with one another, saying, "If we say from heaven, he will say, 'Why did you not believe him?' But if we say from man, all the people will stone us to death, for they are convinced that John was a prophet. So they answered that they did not know where it came from. And Jesus said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. And he began to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard and let it out to tenants and went into another country for a long while. When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant, but they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one also they wounded and cast out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, what shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him. But when the tenants saw him, they said to themselves, this is the heir. Let us kill him, so that the inheritance may be ours. And they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and destroy those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When they heard this, they said, surely not. But he looked directly at them and said, what then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on him at that very hour, for they perceived that he had told this parable against them, but they feared the people. Okay. Tell us by what authority you do these things. So Jesus comes in, kicks them out. That's the fight being picked. Get out of my Father's house. We see this in chapter 2, in verse 49. When they can't find him, he's 12 years old. And what does he say to his mom?
He's about his father's business.
I'm about my Father's business. I'm in my Father's house. So think of it from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes' perspective. They've got this Galilean visitor with no formal rabbinic training.
Or so they think.
With no formal rabbinic training, so they think, that's right. And they say, you got no right to set yourself up as some authority in our temple. But what Jesus is saying is, I'm not talking about who did the Romans put in charge of these courts. It's physical appointment and authority over spiritual appointment and authority. Human authority over God-given authority. Okay, so what about the story? Let's go to Isaiah. I can't help but think that he might have been referencing in Isaiah 5 this story and changing some of the characters. Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. Let me sing for my beloved my song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? I looked for it to yield grapes. Why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled. I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and briars and thorns shall grow up. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold, bloodshed. For righteousness, but behold, an outcry. Jesus' hearers would have recognized this story of this vineyard that did not produce, I think, immediately. Except we changed some of the elements of the story. He uses a familiar story. He changes a few things in it. So, when he's retelling it, he changes the focus from the vineyard to the tenant farmers. Who were the tenant farmers?
Pharisees.
Yeah, religious leaders. Who abused the servants. Who were the servants?
Prophets that were sent time and time again.
Prophets. And after they abuse prophet after prophet, eventually the vineyard owner says, you know what? I'll send my son. They'll respect him. He tells the people just days before a parable that says, you're going to kill me. He just comes right out and says it. And the craziest thing about it is as soon as the story ends, what do they want to do?
Guilty.
They want to take him. But these huge crowds keep him alive for a short period of time. They wanted to take him when he came into the temple courts. And what did it say? It said they feared the crowds. Okay? Then they ask him this question. So why the question about John the Baptist? You can't read Luke and not think that Jesus was super quick on his feet. Like, in terms of, they always paint him as a common man, but I will say that, like, if we were hanging out with Jesus, I think we'd be like, he's quick, though. He's very quick on his feet. What about the John the Baptist?
Well, they didn't receive John the Baptist for themselves. They rejected his testimony, but the prostitutes and all the other so-called low-grade people accepted him.
Yeah, but it says that they thought that John was a prophet in this passage.
But they never listened, their ancestors never listened to the prophets. They buried
No,
them.
they didn't. But the people that had pilgrimed there, they were enamored with John the Baptist. They thought that there was something about John. I think the reason John disappears the way he does was clear-cut when John says, hey, like, I'm unfit to tie his hand. It's very clear that John needed to disappear to make the message very clear about who Jesus was. John was to pave the way. Jesus was to complete the mission. And so when we look at this, I think he just kind of honed in on the popularity of John as a great way to sidestep this question and say, like, hey, was John from heaven or was he from man?
They were just trying to trick him anyway.
Yeah. But just think about the context of what we are reading today. It's very clear that in this kind of 2-chapter set, Jesus has taken the focus away from, I'm going to Jerusalem to die, to shift to, as I'm entering Jerusalem, I'm going to make sure everyone knows that its days are numbered. And it's not so much that the days are numbered in some, tough guy way. It is just, there is a punishment due for the treatment of the prophets and ultimately the Son of God. And that's what this story tells us. The story of the vineyard. What should their reaction have been to the story of this vineyard? We just assume that it's fine that they are like, oh yeah, he just told us we're going to kill him. And yeah, let's see if we can grab him. Oh man, those people are right there. We can't do it right now. But what are they going to do? They're going to wait. When do they arrest him?
In the dark.
In the dark. Are there tons of crowds around? No. They waited for a time when they could go arrest him, when the people wouldn't make the issue. And then those people, as those people that had come for the works, that didn't know exactly what was going on, as those people start to process through and see that this guy's not leading us in a military revolt against Rome, they're going to say, I don't think that guy was who I thought he was.
Isn't it interesting that when Jesus is tempted, finally Luke says Satan left him waiting for a more opportune time? That's the way evil is. That's the way those who are disciples of Satan operate.
Yeah. I read this story by Kenneth Bailey. Told a pretty remarkable story about Jordan, the country. Jordan's King Hussein, that illustrates what should have been the tenant farmer's response to the vineyard authority. One night in the early 1980s, the king was informed by his security police that a group of about 75 Jordanian army officers were at that very moment in a nearby barracks plotting a military overthrow of his kingdom. The security officers requested permission to surround the barracks and arrest the plotters. The king refused and said, "Bring me a small helicopter." A helicopter was brought. The king climbed in with the pilot and himself, flew to the barracks, and landed on the flat roof. The king told the pilot, "If you hear gunshots, fly away at once without me." Unarmed, the king appeared in the room where the plotters were meeting and quietly said to them, "Gentlemen, it has come to my attention that you are meeting here tonight to finalize your plans to overthrow the government, take over the country, and install a military dictator. If you do this, the army will break apart and the country will be plunged into civil war. Tens of thousands of innocent people will die. There is no need for this. Here I am. Kill me and proceed. That way, only one man will die." After a moment of stunned silence, the rebels, as one, rushed forward to kiss the king's hand and feet and pledge loyalty to him for life. I couldn't help but read that story and think about how Jesus, even though he announces, just like Mike said, "I wanted to gather you in, but you wouldn't have me." He tells this story before he's dead. These people still had the opportunity to say, "You know what? I have seen things from you that I've never seen from anyone. And my position is not so important that I need to fight for my position." But it is clear that all they were concerned about was power and keeping their own position. That's why it says that as soon as he finished the story, they were like, "Can we get him now?" You know, it reminds me of John 11. I've made this point 1,000 times. In John 11, when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and the leaders start meeting about it, their conclusion is the very people that said, "We keep the law," said, "You know, if we just killed this guy, we might be able to get rid of all this nonsense. If we just break one of the commands that we say we keep, we might be able to get ourselves away from some of this." They weren't worried about keeping the commandments because the number one thing to them was of their own power, self-interest, position, whatever those things were. Any concluding comments?
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
One thing that really stands out to me is when Jesus is coming into the city and they say, "Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord." That's a quote from Psalm 118. And when Jesus says, "The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone," that's another quote from Psalm 118. And these people that know the scriptures, you talked about following the rabbis and their education and learning and memorizing the scriptures, they put that together, you know, that most of those are from Psalm 118. I think that prophecy points to Jesus so accurately. And nevertheless, they still want to kill him right away. It just is.
Thank you. Okay, we'll pick up on Wednesday night. Thank you.